Uh,
Very sleepy today.
there's coffee in the back.
Got it. Thank you.
There's my cold coffee in the basement. It's in the fridge. That'll wake you up. Your plan did not work out.
Hi there.
Yeah, he brought Molly, but not Karen.
You should have brought Karen. Oh, my. I'm sorry.
I was a little terrified where that was going, to be entirely honest. But throwing you in the trash can is one of the better
I
options.
was saying, blessing indeed. Consider we're blocking it.
When, he woke me up this morning by telling me what my Father's Day present was, so. Okay, so Genesis chapter 15, who would like to start reading for us? Go ahead.
After these events, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. He said, "Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward." Abram said, "Lord God, what can you give me, since I remain childless, and the one whom I inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus?" Abram also said, "Look, you have given me no offspring, so a servant born in my house will be my heir."
Just then the word of the Lord came to him. God said, "This man will not be your heir, but instead one who will come out of your own body will be your heir." The Lord then brought him outside and said, "Now look toward the sky and count the stars, if you are able to count them." He said to Abram, "This is what your descendants will be like." Abram believed in the Lord, and the Lord credited to him as righteousness. He said to him, "I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land as a possession." He said, "Lord God, how will I know that I will possess it?" The Lord said to him, "Bring a heifer 3 years old, a female goat 3 years old, a ram 3 years old, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon." Abram gathered all these, divided them in half, and laid the two halves across from each other. But he did not divide the birds in two. Birds of prey came down on the carcasses, but Abram drove them away. When the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell on Abram. Then terrifying deep darkness fell on him. The Lord said to Abram, "Know this, your descendants will live as aliens in a land that is not theirs, and they will serve its people, who will afflict them for 400 years. But I will surely judge the nations that they will serve. Afterward, your descendants will come out with great wealth, but you will go to your fathers in peace. You will be buried at a good old age. In the fourth generation, your descendants will come here again, because the guilt of the Amorites is not yet full." Then, when the sun had gone down and it was dark, suddenly a smoking oven and a flaming torch passed between the pieces. On that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram. He said, "To your descendants I have given this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates. I will give you the territory of the Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, and the Rephaites, the Amorites, and the Canaanites, the Girgashites, and the Jebusites."
Well done. You handled all those names very well. Maybe you should have read the account of the kings last week.
Heard it a few times.
So, after these events, oh, before we get into it, anything strike you guys while you were going through there? Anything particular, Larry?
Well, it says 400 years of the.
Ah, we'll get to that.
That's why it's so long.
Ah, gotcha. Okay, I should refine my question. Did anything strike you that isn't something I'm going to ask about on the sheet I handed out?
Yeah,
Yes.
the guilt of the Amorites is not full yet.
Ah,
That's false.
what about that?
It was practicing sex. False.
Hmm. But what about that struck you, Rachel?
Well, the God was waiting for a while,
Hmm.
but I don't know why.
What do you suppose?
Chance to repent.
Good an answer as any. You know I need really wicked people?
Yeah.
I have two uncles, well, step uncles. Well said. One uncle was actually used as an example in one of my catechism classes of the hypocrisy of the Catholic Church. This man was on trial for raping his ex-wife, kidnapping her, tying her to a bed, the whole deal. But my cousin, who was a Catholic priest at the time, the man's personal parish priest, and other members of the Catholic Church testified on his behalf about what a good man he is. He went to jail for a while. Was later jailed for tax fraud. Perfectly healthy. Then there was my Uncle Gary. My Uncle Gary, he liked to drink, but other than that, he was a wonderful man. At my brother's wedding, I was sitting up at the main table, and Caitlin didn't know really anyone else at the wedding. So Gary pulled her aside, had her sit with him, and just made her laugh the entire time. In fact, he would fake flirt with her just to annoy me. My Uncle Gary died because he was holding a door open for a lady to get into the bowling alley, slipped on some ice, and fell down the flight of steps. My Uncle Gary was, by all accounts and estimations, a good man. My Uncle Jerry is a two-time felon. One of them is living, one of them is dead. You guys can think of accounts like this in your own life. Maybe not with uncles, but with other people you know, right? Why do people go and other people stay? Because the guilt of the Amorites is not yet full.
God's not ready yet.
What is one of the words we call our time on earth, one of the names we have for it. Our time on earth. It's also the name of a Wells-produced devotional television show.
Time grace.
There you go. Why do we call it that?
Everybody a certain period of time to earn, to him.
Hmm. Yep. And for those who haven't, they often get longer lives. So either they repent and turn to him or are left without any excuse at all. Or, as Billy Joel put it so crassly, only the good die young. The guilt of the Amorites is not yet full. They hadn't used up their time of grace yet. Can't hear me, Delsey?
My battery went dead.
Ah. I'll try to talk louder, but I also don't want to spike Myron's hearing aid like I've done before. And that, oh no. So yeah, that's one I didn't talk about on the sheet, but it's definitely worth talking about. Anything else?
I think it's interesting that Abraham waited for the Lord, you know, he just waited to take care of the predators and then he had faith in God, God wouldn't come.
We'll be talking about that a bit more because what's going on there, I think, is rather fascinating. So, first words of the chapter. After these events. Which events? Mm-hmm.
Sodom and Gomorrah. And, or the attack on Sodom.
Right. Yeah, that little commando raid that Abram and his men went on. After that, God came to Abram and said, I am going to make your descendants numerous. What was Abram's reaction? Why was Abram's reaction to God curious?
Because he didn't have any children.
Well, that makes what God said curious. Abram's reaction. How did Abram react?
Eliezer of Damascus would have stayed. Was he afraid?
That's the question. There's two possible reasons Abram answered God like this. What are those two possible reasons? If you only have one, one's a good start.
Well, either he didn't believe that God could make it happen, or he did believe that God could make it happen.
Well, if it was the second one, why is he reacting this way?
He wants more answers.
More or less. Because on their face, these words sound like he's saying, God, come on. What are you talking about? I'm old, my wife's old. We have no kids. So, we're going to what's the deal? What even is the deal here? Yeah. Or he could be saying, and maybe you prayed like this, God, you made a promise here. Show me the fulfillment of that promise. Holding God to his word. Now, is there anything wrong with holding God to his word? Look, if God promises that he's going to do something for you, you can say, God, where is that fulfillment? Because expecting God to keep his promises is not an act of doubt. It's an act of faith. Because you have people in your life who say they're going to do something, and you put it at about 50-50, right? Oh yeah, I'll be there. Yeah, they might show up, they might not. But you have people in your life who, when they say they're going to do something, they do it. And if it isn't done yet, you can go and ask them, why isn't this done yet? And they'll have a really terrific reason why it isn't done. You're looking for information. You're not saying, I don't think you're going to accomplish this. You say, oh, what's going on? You have people in your life like that, right? Well, God's like that. If God says something's going to happen, it's going to happen. And if it hasn't happened yet, it is part of your responsibility as a Christian to pray for its fulfillment. God exists out of time. We exist in time. So when God promises something, it's already fulfilled. But for us, it takes a while on that fulfillment, doesn't it? I guess that covers number 2 as well. Question 3, take a look at verse 6. What is so important about verse 6? Yep. That is important, but that's not the part I was looking at. Oh, it's right there. Read verse 6. Out loud, if you like. What does it say? Abram believed in the Lord, and the Lord credited it to him as righteousness. Well,
Jesus is the Lord of righteousness.
Abram believed. Now let's talk about that. Is there anything special about believing God? Is there anything notable or worthy about believing God? Sure. Absolutely. So, believing. Is believing a particularly noble act? is it particularly worthy? Is it particularly notable? Is it any credit to you that you believe? No. It is what you're supposed to be doing anyway. If you wake up in the morning, get out of bed, make breakfast, and take a shower, should you get a medal for that?
It's like, you know,
The making breakfast part at least? You do it anyway, exactly. This is just something that ought to be happening. Abram believed. That's not special. It's not special that he believed, but Abram believed, and what did God do? Credited it. Credited it. That verb is important. Gave him credit for something that he shouldn't have received credit for.
Okay, we give God the greatness in this passage, but Abraham's just.
Yeah, you don't deserve a medal for breathing. You don't deserve anything for just being, for just doing what you ought to do anyway.
Never understood that.
Farming is an important job, right? Very important job. Several of you have been farmers. You ever receive a medal for farming? You ever receive a medal for going out and planting the crops? How about harvesting them? No? Because it's what you have to do. If that's your job, that's what you do. I haven't gotten a medal for preaching because it's my job. That's what I'm supposed to be doing. If you're a farmer, you're supposed to be growing crops and planting them. Important or unimportant, doing your job doesn't give you credit. It just means you're doing what you're supposed to be doing in the first place. As humans, it's our job to believe what our Creator says. But God, out of his richness, out of his grace, out of his mercy, credited to Abram as righteousness, which implies a couple of things. First of all, and you got a credit card? What's a credit card basically for? Spending money you don't have on the promise that you will pay it back later. Giving you something you don't have because you're assuming you'll have it later. So if crediting something is something you don't have, Abram didn't have what? Righteousness, exactly. Abram didn't have righteousness, but God credited it to him. God counted it for him because he believed. Because he was doing what he ought to be doing anyway, God counted that as righteousness. Why is that so very important?
Not to downplay a lot of preaching today does, saying that you believe in Jesus, you will add all kinds of things to that.
Well, yeah, certainly it takes an element of, it takes any thought of work righteousness out of it, to be sure, but apply it more personally. Go. You bring Myrna back?
Yeah.
Attaboy.
Well, it's kind of a decision theology thing. We can't decide.
You guys are thinking way too hard about this.
Well,
There's so much of it, it makes it.
Yeah, no, everything you're applying is correct, but make it yours. How does this apply to you? Is the preaching you're railing against? If you ever hear that from me up there, you go ahead and hug a Kindle on my head. I've seen your throwing arm, you hit Nancy.
God's credit to you.
What did Abram do?
God's righteous.
Yes, Abram believed. What do? You believe. And if he credited to Abram as righteousness, he is also crediting it to you as righteousness. Not because you're great, not because you're special, not because you're doing anything worthy, but because God, in his grace and his glory, gives you extra for doing something you're supposed to be doing anyway.
None of us is greater than the other.
Well, what I would suggest doing, if you haven't done it in a while, go home, read Hebrews. Because a lot of what we talk about here in this Bible class is also covered in the book of Hebrews. And the book of Hebrews builds some really amazing points out of things. There's practically a whole chapter devoted to this one verse in the book of Hebrews. We talked last week about how Melchizedek doesn't come up again until Hebrews. And this week we're talking about verse 6. Anything further on that? So what was Abram's attitude in verse 8?
His attitude, he basically wanted to know how good that could be.
So,
How the way maybe.
what's his attitude? If you ask how something's going to happen, well, think of the examples of Zechariah and Mary. Both were told some pretty shocking news. What's the difference between the two of them?
Between Zechariah and Mary.
But Mary asked a question. Mary asked a question. Right. There's a difference between surprise and unbelief. Mary knew biology. She knew how girls get pregnant. And she had not taken any steps towards getting pregnant. So say, how's this going to happen? Isn't an act of unbelief. It was frankly an act of curiosity. What? How are you going to do this? Zechariah doubted what the angel told him, and he didn't get to talk for 9 months. I saw that smile. You were looking forward to me not talking for 9 months, weren't you? Here's the deal here. If I'm not talking for 9 months, we don't have that house anymore. So, yeah. Abram's attitude was like Mary's. Well, how's this going to happen? What's going to occur to make this take place? So, verses 9 and 10. Do any of you know off the top of your head what's happening here?
Kind of like a pledge, like you do as a testimony or,
They're making a covenant. What happened back then, to make a covenant, you cut some animals in half, put a bird on either side, and then one party would walk down the path to the end, and the other party would walk back the other way as a way of symbolizing their agreement. Much like you probably seal a deal with a handshake or something like that, right? There it was a bit more elaborate to make it a bit more visceral, a bit more meaningful. So this was them forming the covenant. I'm going to skip number 6 and talk about number 7. What's remarkable about the way this covenant was made?
outside each other.
Yeah. This was a one-sided covenant. Nothing was asked of Abram at all. He didn't move. He didn't flinch. God made the covenant. This was a covenant of grace. Sinai is a two-sided covenant. Honor your father and mother so that it may go well with you. The implication being that if you don't, things are going to go bad for you. Whoever breaks any of these laws will have punishment ascribed to them. Whoever does not break these laws will not have punishment ascribed to them. The point being, if you do things well, you'll earn heaven. Since you won't be able to handle it, you need to rely on the previous covenant. A covenant which is remade every time we celebrate the Lord's Supper. Every time you hear the forgiveness of sins announced to you. That is a one-sided covenant. You ain't doing nothing. The only thing you do is believe, which, as we talked about, you're supposed to be doing in the first place. It credits you nothing at all, except that God gives you something for it. God has made a one-sided covenant with you, just as he made with Abraham. That's what's happening here. Also, what is God predicting in verses 12 through 15? To 15, what is God predicting? Yep. The slavery in Egypt is being predicted there. Come on in, there's no need to hide in the back. Except for Emily. Emily needs to hide. Jeez, Steve. Okay. Any questions on any of this? Genesis 15 is a cool chapter. Definitely worth looking through several times. All right. Now, 3 of you, I have seen this. You 2 have been hiding. Glad you're here.